In today's episode of Survival Dispatch News, we revisit the disturbing trend of violence in places of worship. Well, guys, welcome back to Survival Dispatch News. We have a really disturbing trend that's been going on for a while now that we're going to discuss, and that is violence and terrible atrocities happening in church environments. And that's the topic of today. Joining me again is my good friend Sal DeGennaro to discuss this today. And Sal, as always, or as recently has been, our tradition is to discuss our conflicted card of the day, the conflicted the game. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's an awesome card game. It sort of puts you in the scenario of a post-apocalyptic scenario and throws these terribly conflicted questions at you. And this is one of them again today, isn't it, Sal?
Sure.
What do we have?
Believe it or not, I've not even read it yet. So I'm going to look at it for the first time. So I will be as shocked as the audience is for the question today. So here
Well,
we
I
go.
have seen it, and you're seeing
Oh,
it
you
now.
have?
So,
Okay. I haven't
yeah.
read it yet. This is my first time reading it. So
All
here we
right.
go. We'll all think about it till the end of the show here. Okay. So your last loved one in the world has contracted a deadly disease that can spread to you. Sorry, the resolution's a bit bad, but I see it. Okay, to take care of her before she passes would certainly mean your death, but if you don't take care of her needs, no one else will. What would you do in this situation if this happened to you? Another tough one.
Yeah, really tough one. Okay, so soak it up, guys. We're going to give you our opinions, our answers on that. Try not to think about it too much, Sal, because I'm going to hit you with it at
Yeah,
the end
yeah.
of this discussion. But man, so much freaking craziness going on in the world. Just at the last 2 weeks of February, so many freaking crazy things have happened at churches or mosques or church, religious meetings or environments. And a lot of this information that we have comes from our good friend Keith Graves from Christian Warrior Training. And folks, if you don't follow Keith Graves on YouTube, you need to. We often include him in some of our discussions. You have seen him, you will see him in some of our podcasts and interviews and Survival Dispatch news segments. He's just a real great guy, a 29-year police vet, SWAT team veteran specializing in church security. So on his channel, Christian Warrior Training, he highlights all these violent acts in religious environments and gives advice. And he kind of breaks it down, shows you what happens. Sometimes he involves body cam with the police officers and really, really breaks it down. And so, well, this guy did a good job. This guy needed to do that, or church security, or civilians, or whatever. Really cool stuff. So make sure you follow Keith Graves, Christian Warrior Training. And I was watching some of his content, Sal, and I had no idea how many of these violent acts have been happening really just recently in a very short time. And I'm just going to give you a rundown, okay? Just
Certainly.
humor me for just a second. So, February 23rd, a burglar stabs a man at a church in Brooklyn, New York, stabs him in the neck with a sharp device. February 24th, a man shows up at a Nashville church with a gunshot wound. Doesn't necessarily commit an act of violence, but this happened at a church. He could have been a violent guy. They did. I think the police, I don't know if they ever tracked him down, or just kind of a strange thing. February 25th, here's a big one now. Keith Graves did some content on this. A pastor shot in the face in front of his church. This was in Memphis, Tennessee. Terrible. He was trying to prevent a car theft right in front of his church. So he goes out and confronts these guys, and what do they do? They shoot him in the face. Luckily, he's in stable condition. He lived through that, but right in front of his church, in broad daylight. Again, February 25th. Now, this is interesting. Keith talked about this was an incident that happened in Africa. Okay, humor me on this. 15 people killed. I believe it was a Catholic church in Africa. These guys just stormed in, blam, 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 just shot them. It was they characterized it as a terrorist act. Now, the reason this is important to think about is because these are the people, some of the demographics that are flowing into the United States through our open borders. Think about that now.
Mhm.
The fighting age, military age men, and so on and so forth. Just, something to think about. This is legit. February 26th, the St. Louis church, kidnapping and assault, weird scenario in a church. February 27th, Florida church, Broward County, Florida, vandalized. They had a guy on camera breaking windows and vandalizing the church. People inside the church at that time. Back February 25th, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a quadruple shooting outside of a church. I believe it was a Catholic church. Broad daylight again. 2 people dead, 2 people injured. As the church was letting out right outside of the church. I'm not sure the day of this next one, Melville, Louisiana. A woman drives up. There's some photographic evidence of this woman driving up to a church. Where was this? Louisiana, and assaults people with a handgun, working outside of the church, like
Mhm.
I don't know, working on landscaping or something. Just crazy stuff. Oh, there's a guy indicted in Roseville, California, um, from something that happened back in November, just recently indicted, and that was a bomb hoax. Thank goodness it was a hoax, right? But this crazy trend, Sal, of church violence, and we've talked about this a little bit previously. Churches being relatively soft targets. Um, the crazies know this. They're gonna prey on these soft targets like churches, and we've talked about what can you do, prepare, given little bits and pieces of advice. Maybe you actually know of a few more incidents that I may not have thought about. But what about this crazy trend of church violence and church shootings? And these are just the ones that I mentioned that are being covered by the media, or at least getting attention by the media. And folks like Keith picking up on that and providing educational opportunities about that. But just blows my mind, Sal. Almost on a daily basis, hearing about church violence, church shootings, these
Mhm.
atrocities happening in these church environments. And I want your spin on it. And what can you tell us about this? Do you know of other incidents that maybe I haven't mentioned that were kind of interesting?
So no, what's terrifying about this is you just ran through 4 or 5 incidents here that actually just happened in the last week. So I
Yeah,
want to impress that on people. And the media generally gives very little coverage to this, which is, another absurdity. We're living in clown world, why the media wouldn't cover this stuff. And again, hat tip to Keith on his Christian Warrior channel, you know, putting the spotlight on this stuff. And I suggest to everybody watching, follow his channel, even if you don't go to church, even if you're not a Christian. And I'm going to get into some reasons for that. So, unlike other countries, I don't think people realize how here in the United States, how well we actually all get along. And I know it doesn't seem like that now because there's a political faction in this country that wants to divide us all and set us
that's
against
right.
each other based on race, based on religion, etc.
That's
This
right.
is the most eclectic and diverse. You know how they love that term diversity? This is the
Oh
most
yeah.
diverse country in the world, bar none. And despite that, we actually get along surprisingly well. And as an example of that is actually this violence that we see against houses of worship. Unlike most other countries that deal with these kind of things, where it's different religions committing atrocities on each other, that's been very infrequent here in the United States. And what I want to point out to people is that over and over and over again, when we see these attacks on houses of worship, it is committed by people with radical secular ideals.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So let
Yep.
that sink in with everybody. Now it's happened. Let's not deny reality. It's happened where you have, a person of whatever religion attack whatever religion. But again, in this country, it's infrequent. What is much more frequent is somebody who is of an ideology that hates religion. Okay. And I am convinced the reason for that is if you are religious, then you worship God, not the state. And they have a problem with that.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting spin. And when
Right.
you look at some of these incidents and we know, the identities of the assailants or the people who commit these violent acts, we often see folks that are, I'm just going to say, not like us, that are different. And a lot of women. We're seeing women, whereas the trend was historically men committing these acts. We've seen a
Mhm.
number of women committing these acts as well. And I'm not trying to throw shade at transgender folks and folks of who believe in 15,000 different genders and all that kind of stuff. But we are seeing a lot more of those folks doing this kind of stuff as well. And it
Right.
just sort of strikes me that this idea that you're talking about right now is kind of resonating with me when I'm
Mhm.
thinking back on that.
Because let's think about what has transpired. Now, we've talked about the threat of the open border where we may have, radical jihadi terrorism going forward. And that's a different thing. Right now, we're talking about domestically what we've seen, right? And we've seen very little of that. There's been some of it, but very little. We've talked about the lone wolf things where, different ideologies people will act out on. But again, coming back to the attacks on houses of worship, it tends to be this radical secularism that is attacking these places. And the majority has been churches, but I want to remind people that synagogues, there's been massacres at synagogues, there's been attacks on mosques, especially in foreign lands, like you think of that New Zealand thing, right? There was a particularly bad massacre at a Sikh temple. About 10 years ago in our
That's
own
right.
country, maybe longer now. So
Yeah.
it's houses of worship. And I come back to that the people who are doing this, we've seen, okay, mental illness and all this, but if you look at their ideology, they hate religious institution. Now, Christian churches in particular also get a second level of hate, that being associated with this whole idea of, the white patriarchy, all this kind of nonsense. I find that very laughable because if you want to see strong Christian tradition, look at our African American community,
Yeah.
look at our Korean community, etc. I'd
Yeah.
say it's stronger there than it is with most white people, right? So, but again, Christianity now is associated with the West and the West is associated with
It's
oppression,
associated with
right?
conservative
Yes,
mindset
exactly
as
right.
well, and
Exactly
and
right.
then there's a political aspect to that, like it or not,
Hmm.
that conservative mindset, and so that's definitely worth discussing and
Yeah.
exploring because I
Right.
think that's a legitimate thing.
Hmm.
That correlation between religious church going folks and having that conservative nature, which translates over to political beliefs as well. Don't you
Right.
think?
Absolutely. And I reiterate that it's not just Christian churches. There's attacks on
Right, right, right.
multiple, houses of worship, but
Of course.
we see it now. Granted, there's more Christian churches than there is other religious venues, but I think again that combination of things makes especially churches now prone to this. So whatever form of religion, whatever house of worship you go to, you have to realize you're not immune to this, that this is a thing. And, I'll just give you an example. And when we talk about history, that's my wheelhouse. I have a master's degree in American history in particular, but, I'm a history guy. I've been all my
Yeah.
life. Um, One of the interesting things that arose in the 20th century is a rebellion against religion, especially coming out of the First World War. Okay, that's when atheism really took hold because there is the idea that how could a benevolent God allow this to happen? Right. Now, a lot of secular people, they hate religion and they hold religion responsible for all of the ills in the world. And now there's some legitimate criticism. Okay. So, for example, look at what the Catholic Church did in the Middle Ages, right? They absolutely
Oh yeah.
suppressed advancement and it was a political entity. Look at what Islam did in the Middle Ages. A lot of Islamic nations till now have this fundamentalist idea. Okay. But what I remind people of is, how Steve Bannon famously said that politics is downstream of culture? I'll
Hmm.
let everyone in on a little secret. Religion is downstream of culture.
Hmm.
The culture overrules the religion, and the culture will turn the religion into the tool that they want.
Yep.
Just put that out there to let everybody think about. Okay. So when it comes to the argument that religion is somehow the culprit to all of mankind's troubles, I will remind everybody, and you can look this up. I don't just say things. 90% of the people who died in genocide in the 20th century were killed by regimes that were officially atheist.
Hmm.
Okay. Communist Russia, Socialist Russia, Nazi Germany, Communist China, officially atheist. Okay, so
Hmm.
spare me the whole thing about how religion is the source of all of our violence. I want people to
Hmm.
realize that. So the reason I
Yeah.
bring that up is that there is now, especially on the far left, but it's not just the left that we've seen these attacks come from, but overwhelmingly, there is a far, far left extremism that is an extreme secularism that hates religion. And that is the source of what we're seeing.
Yeah. Interesting. Uh, Going backtracking a little bit, you know, I went back and watched some of the body cam footage of a couple of incidents that Keith had on his channel, and one of which was the incident where the person had the child with them and used the child as a shield, and the child was injured in the shooting. But what really stood out at me was the police officers' reactions to this whole incident. And you know, we want to and I'm a former police officer, and some of these things hurt me to say, but we want to think that law enforcement is going to come and save us, and that's not always the case. We must be our first responders. Sometimes, even when there are police officers present in the area we're in and violence occurs. And so the body cam footage from that particular incident was very revealing. Um, One thing that sticks out of my head was a female officer was was more concerned with the fact that she didn't think her body cam was working
Mhm.
than actually going toward the sound of gunfire and trying to eliminate that threat. In another piece of video footage, we see an officer taking cover instead of going toward the threat and not taking advantage of what at one point was a very easy target when the violent person laid the weapon down and spoke of having a bomb which wasn't there, and she could have taken that person out, or he could have taken that person out at that time. So bottom line is, even when police are in your presence, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to save you. So we as individuals, we got to have a plan. We
Mhm.
got to be thinking about this every time you step foot in a building, whether it's a church or a grocery store or a mall or any of those places. And I know what you guys are going to be saying in the comments. Well, I'm not going to worry about that because I don't go there. I don't go to these large guys. Well, at some point or another, you may find yourself in that situation, whether you go to church or not. You're going to have to go to a government building. You're going to have to go to a hospital. You may not have a choice. You have to go through a building full of soft targets, and you want to be one of those soft targets, and maybe you will be. Maybe you don't have a choice, but we must have a plan, and we must be thinking about those things, right, Sal? Because it's going to happen when you don't expect it. Because they're not
Yes.
going to take
Yeah.
out an advertisement to say, "I'm going to attack the Holy Church of the Rosary on Sunday, whatever it is, at such and such time." That's not
Mhm.
going to happen. It's just going to happen when it happens, and you might be there, and you got to have that plan. And as always, Sal, we have these little discussions before we share our videos, and we talk about we're going to we're going to give you guys as viewers our opinions and some of our suggestions. And number one, it almost always leads to situational awareness, right, Sal?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these incidents have been a good example of that. The one that comes to mind, and again, Keith covered this really well on his channel. The woman who pulled up to a church while people were out just working, like doing work on the grounds or something like that, and she opens fire on them. Now, if you want to think about what would be generally a low threat profile, right? Imagine you're like doing yard work around a church. You know, hardly the place that you're not in a back alley in Compton. You know, it's just you wouldn't think, but this is a perfect example of you always have to have a plan. You have to have awareness up all the time, and you should always be carrying. So, as an example, maybe this is an example of even if you have a church with a strict no guns policy, well, if you're working outside the church, be carrying your guns, people. I mean, be carrying your gun. You know, and that is the most important thing we come back to over and over and over again. Be armed. It can happen anywhere, and it can happen to you.
I'm going
And
to interject,
people,
and
yeah,
I
go
want to tell
ahead.
you, Sal, I'm not going. I'm not going to attend a congregation that has a no gun policy.
Yeah,
I'm not
I
going to do it.
absolutely agree with that. I
I,
absolutely agree with that.
that
That
goes
needs to
against my
stop.
beliefs, my political beliefs, my constitutional rights. I'm not going to go.
Hmm. Hmm.
I will find somewhere else to go if I want to go and worship.
Yes,
Sorry to cut
certainly.
you off. I just want to tell you
No,
my
no, you're
opinion on that.
absolutely right. And in fact, that certainly, I think the primary reason for the attack on houses of worship is the ideological component that we discussed. However, another thing that factors into that is there's still a perception that houses of worship are soft targets, even though that many have changed, right? That's why we see a lot of creeps get shot down real quick now at houses of worship. But I don't know if all of these um, psychopaths are onto that yet. I
Yeah.
think the idea that they're still generally soft targets is in their head. And there's a long historical tradition of this. In fact, I sent you a link to a couple articles, Denny, that you can post with the video. One is an article that I did 5 or 6 years ago. And it's very interesting in a historical context about this whole thing of no weaponry in church. And what inspired me to write that article, I mention it in the article, is again, 5 or 6 years ago, I was watching the series Vikings,
Yep.
which is pretty decent. You know, I mean, there's relatively few shows that I found worth watching. I didn't watch all of it. I watched like the first 2 or 3 seasons of it. Very engaging, the first couple of seasons. And there was a fantastic scene in an episode where this head Viking chieftain, who the series follows, um, the proposed idea of the show is that he's the first Norse chieftain to attack the British Isles. Okay. And he gets there and he lands, and it's his second time attacking now the English mainlands. And he leads his men to a village, and he has them wait all night long before he commences the attack. And they're all saying, "What are we waiting for? What are we waiting for? What are we waiting for?" Sure enough, in the early morning, he hears the church bells, and he says, "Now it's time."
Hmm.
And they go into the village, a small, feudal village, and they go right up to the church, and there is about 2 dozen swords leaning against the outside wall of the church, because in the Middle Ages, you damn sure didn't bring your sword into church. They go in there and they slaughter all the men in the church, and they pillage the village. And in the article, I discussed that scene, how exceptionally well done that scene is. And then I talked about, and this is sad, it shows you how many there's been. I talked to, oh, you know what? I think this was right after the Texas Church of Christ shooting
Ah,
happened, where Stephen Williford,
yeah.
intercepted that guy, unfortunately, after he had killed like 25 people.
Hmm.
And I just made the point that this is a historical idea that somehow came in to the church, that you don't carry your weapon in the house of God, which is absurd. And speaking of which, everybody, Keith Graves on his channel just interviewed Lieutenant David Grossman, who,
Hmm.
whatever you think of his writing, like I like a lot of it I don't agree with. He's always a great interview, though.
Yeah.
He makes a fantastic point about that, how when Jesus told his followers, sell your coat and buy a sword, he
Yeah.
makes the point, and again, I encourage everybody to watch the interview, that the sword at the time was not referring to your handgun. Everybody was carrying a knife. but two of those 12 apostles had a sword on them. That was the equivalent to your AR-15 at the time.
Good
So
point.
he makes a great point. He's like, okay, you're a follower of Christ, then sell your coat and buy your AR-15. So
Yeah.
this idea that you should be unarmed at church is an absurdity. That
Yep.
just it is a historical tradition that to this day a lot of these lunatics presume that a church is going to be a soft target, and that has encouraged this behavior.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I do want to bring up this point, and this is something that Keith brought up when he was sort of critiquing one of those situations as well that had a lot of body cam footage and security camera footage. And here's the deal: just because you have armed police officers at that church doesn't mean they haven't just got off a 10-hour shift. They're tired, their radio batteries are going dead, et cetera, et cetera. Or an off duty cop who might be carrying his pistol with one magazine in it isn't quite up to par. He's just doing what he needs to do. Maybe he's been working all week as well. Usually these church jobs are extra paid jobs on the side. They're not generally not a part of the regular shift or activity of the police officers. This is something that our viewers may not be aware of. And to see some of this footage, again, we encourage you to go to Keith Graves' Christian Warrior Training YouTube channel and check. You'll see what I'm talking about. Not all the police officers are 100% alert, ready for duty, even equipment wise. I'm talking about a radio that's been working all night, portable radio, battery going dead. And he even said, at some point you could hear them clicking there. A lot of them wear speaker mics, up here for quick access, trying to transmit information, and you can hear that the extra beeps and clicks that indicate the battery's going dead. Things that are not thought about. But on the bright side, there's one clip on one of his videos where an off-duty police officer has his full-size duty handgun with a 15 or 17 round magazine, and he does a mag change. He does carry an extra magazine. And Keith poses the question: if you are on a church security team, or if you are just an individual and carrying, how prepared really
Mhm.
are you? Are you training on a regular basis? Is your equipment up to par? Are you just carrying your Ruger 380 because it's small and handy and convenient and doesn't hurt, and you can and you hardly know it's there, and so on and so forth? Are you doing things for the right reason or not for the right reason? Just because you carry certain equipment or lack of certain equipment for a comfort level is not the right answer.
Mhm.
Train like you're going to fight, right? Train with the equipment you're going to fight with, and have that extra magazine or two. And as you talk about, sometimes even Sal, that backup weapon, whatever that is, be it your favorite snub nose revolver, which I know you like. It might be on your ankle or
Yeah, it
in the
certainly
small
has a
of your back
backup.
or something
Yeah, yeah,
like that.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I want to throw that out there. Don't be a sheep that's confident that the sheepdog is going to protect because the sheepdog is tired, improperly equipped, and not ready for duty, and maybe not going to respond properly as well. So
Certainly.
be your own first responder, even in the presence of law enforcement officers. And it kills me to say that. I hate to
No,
say
I
that.
know, but you
It's the
make a great
truth.
point. You make a
It's the
great
truth.
point. So here's what I want to, impress on everybody when it comes to that. When it comes to law enforcement officers, you run the gamut all the way from the real John Wick, to the guy who stood outside the high school in Florida and didn't go inside,
Oh yeah.
and even prevented other responding deputies from going
Yeah.
inside. That's
Yeah.
the gamut you run. So might you get the real John Wick? You might, if you're lucky, but you'd have to be real lucky, right? I
Yeah.
would say the majority on any given police force are not that guy. So this whole idea of relying on others, this comes back to a social trend we've had now for decades of we contract out violence, right? This idea that it is the state's job, or even the community's job. You are your own first responder, period. Okay, there is nobody else who is likely to be there in time. And to your point, Denny, if you do have, off-duty law enforcement there, you don't know who you have. Do you have the guy who's, has 1,000 hours of extra professional training and, shoots 1,000 rounds a month? Or do you have the guy who the only time he draws the gun is when he has to do the qualifier for 50 rounds twice a year? You
Yeah.
don't know which one you have there.
Or the officer, I'm just going to say it, or the officers who's grossly overweight, out of
Overweight.
shape,
Yeah.
and couldn't run one city block without being winded. And that's a trend I'm seeing. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not trying to pound on law
Or you might
enforcement.
have
I've been there, done that. But
exactly.
it's
Or you might
it's
have the guy who rolls in jujitsu gym 3 days a
there
week,
you
right?
go. Right,
It's
right,
right.
right.
So, but
Yep.
it is a chance, a gamble that you're taking with your own life and the life of your family. So
Yeah,
you have to be prepared to respond um, to the situation yourself. And, having the law enforcement there or any church security members throws a new wrinkle into it. You have to be prepared to respond, but correctly in order not to get killed by your own people. You
yeah,
really have to bear that in mind. I can tell you that, you know, I'm not a church going guy. I am a devout theist, not atheist, theist. I'm a devout, there is a creator, and that's who I serve and worship. I don't serve and worship the government. I serve and worship God, right? But I'm not a church going guy. Okay. So I
right.
admit that. So if I was, I would make damn sure that I am aware of who is on the security team in the church if there is one. And I would feel things out to know, well, first of all, I would volunteer to be on that security team. And the other thing, I would make sure that they know who I am. Because if things happen, I don't want to catch a bullet from one of
That's
these
right.
guys responding, right?
Yep,
So you
yep.
need to think about that. And if you're in a church that has no security team, then you are the security team while you're there.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. Yeah,
that removes now the fear of taking friendly fire, at least from a security team.
yeah.
Again, this is why it's good to know, it's not my habitat in the church. I readily admit that. I've been in every form of house of worship there is. I've been in Catholic churches and Protestant churches, and I've been in synagogues, and I've been in mosques, and I've been in temples, and I've been in all of them. And generally, there's a similarity that it's a congregation of people who know each other. So you want to make sure you know your people if you are carrying armed, because if something happens, you don't want to accidentally shoot Joe Bob, who's another concealed carrier, part of the congregation, and you don't want Joe Bob shooting you,
Yeah,
right? So you
yeah.
need to know your people.
That's a really good point. Keith was doing a critique of a video, and one of the non-uniformed, I believe it was a police officer. I don't think it was security staff. I think it was a police officer. Was literally actively engaging with his handgun from a distance. You were kind of looking at him from across the hall, and all you see is a guy with a little bit of cover engaging and doing a mag change and engaging some more. And if the police officer had responded in the middle of this firefight and come through that particular door and saw that guy shooting, he could have easily been
Hmm.
misconstrued as the bad guy, and the cops could have engaged him and shot him to death, thinking he was the threat.
Absolutely.
So, real good points there. I recently, I split time between Florida and Illinois here, and when I come to Illinois, I'm in a very small town, and I was approached by some folks who uh, heard about me, so to speak, and wanted me to come and talk to them about church security, and I did because
Hmm.
I have a little bit to offer there.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
no expert. I'm no Keith Graves, mind you, but I did visit with them and talk to them, and they were ready to invest some really serious resources into their church security. They were talking about video, and even having someone monitor that video live in front of a screen live during services. They were talking about putting IFB earpieces in the security team's ears so there was active communication. Um, talking about sending the security team, which was going to be about 6 people, that of any given time, 4 or 5 of them would be attending the different services. They had multi services, even midweek services as well. And they were really kind of thinking about this. And I threw some suggestions at them as well. But I wonder how many churches actually go that far
Mm.
as to have the extra equipment, the extra training, the extra video. That they could literally, if they did it right, literally have a person orchestrating or dispatching the activity that's going on, so that everybody knew what was going on, where it was, what to do, how to get everybody to safety, how to engage the bad guy. How active do you think that congregations of any religious type are as it pertains to this?
I think some are very active and some are not. I wonder if a lot of it probably, and again, Keith would be the guy who would know these kind of things, but I would presume you're onto it with what kind of resources do they have to throw at it. So I always come back to, if you're in a small town, in Appalachia, where there's 50 people who go to your church, there are probably not a lot of resources to throw out a security team there, right? You're the security
Yeah,
team. So the resources that are there. In fact, Keith on his channel made a point which I didn't realize. He said something to the effect that the Jewish synagogues are like well ahead of the curve. They've been for a long time, had more serious security than most churches. So I think it again depends on the resources that are there to put towards it, and of course synagogues for a long time, there's always hate crimes. I mean, the truth is, sadly, to this day, the majority of actual reported hate crimes every year are still against Jews. I mean, they're a very small minority in the country. That
yeah,
that is that is a reality. So they have taken, I think, the security more seriously. With that said, still we see things happen. I think it was just like 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. Time flies, maybe more. But there was that synagogue shooting in New York, right, where a bunch of people got killed. So probably regardless of the religion, you're going to have the places that probably have resources to put towards it and have people with the right mindset. They're going to have significant security. But unfortunately, the vast majority probably just don't have the resources. Again, if you're in a small church where there's, in a rural area where there's 50 people in there, realistically, is there going to be a church security team? Hopefully there's enough people. Hey, you got a few concealed carriers in there. I come
yeah,
back to the point that Stephen Williford, of the Texas church shooting fame, said that he knew everybody in town. There's like 600 people who live in that town. That is
yeah,
the classic example of, oh, it would never happen here. Imagine, right? So it happened there, and he made the point that on any given day in that church, there was usually 4 different men carrying a handgun. That particular day, the monster walked in. 2 of them were out of town, and 2 of them were
yeah,
running late.
yeah,
Right. So how tragic is that? But most rural areas, small congregations, that's realistically probably what you've got to go on, is there's going to be no security there. You are the security. And if there are other concealed carriers there, know your people, know the other members of your congregation, so you don't accidentally shoot each other if something
yeah.
happens.
Yeah, sure enough. So let's do like a brief rundown. Let's talk about some of the things we talked about in the past. And there are a couple of things that stick in my mind from our last discussion about church security. And that's one of those things about where to sit, because I'm one of these guys that I go anywhere. I want to be able to see everything.
Mhm.
I'm one of these guys. I'll sit in the back, and just
Yeah.
so I can have a nice broad view. And we were talking about that. That's not always the best place to sit.
We
uh,
did
you
mention that. Yeah,
you
we did
could
mention
you
that.
could be one of the first targets if
Yes.
someone
Yeah.
comes in that door and sweeps down that aisleway and sends some rounds your direction. So a lot to think about. Let's revisit that. You are going to a worship service somewhere, whether it's a synagogue, a mosque, a Catholic church, a Protestant
Mhm.
church. Let's just kind of do a real quick run through some of the things we need
And
to
I
think about.
remind people, I've been in them all. I have
Yeah,
friends from like literally every faith. I've been in them all. So I'm very familiar with how they are typically laid out.
interesting.
So
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
And I would
So
like to know the differences based on your experience. If you walk into one of these different types of religious religious gatherings. How is it different? Visually, how's it different?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So here's one thing I can tell you: they're all very vulnerable the way they're laid out. There's some differences in just like the tradition of what is done. So, for example, Catholic churches, if you've ever been in them, they typically have pews. So, nice churches will have like the big wooden pews, etc., which may be a good thing because, especially if you're several rows down, now you might have some significant cover, not just one level of it. But if you're
Yeah.
below that, you might have significant cover. On the
For
opposite,
for our viewers, a little definition there. Cover is something that
Mhm.
you would hope would stop the threat, the projectile, the bullet, the whatever. Cover versus concealment, which is just essentially something you can hide behind. Think you're covering yourself up with a blanket or
Yeah,
something that a
again,
bullet or a
one pew,
capacitor.
wooden pew is not going to be covered. But again, if you're down below and you've got 12 pews
Yeah.
behind you, now you've got some significant, on the opposite extreme, you have things like definitely mosques, other temples and stuff also basically have no furniture because they like come in and they
Good
they
point.
they pray on the ground and stuff. Okay, so now you're in a place where you don't want to be in the middle of that because you're
Mm,
devoid of any kind of cover or even
mm,
concealment, right? So you might want to
yeah.
take that. Do you go to a house of worship where there's no cover or concealment? You
Mm,
might want to position yourself where you can very quickly move to something, if not the exit. So it all depends on what is the layout of your
mhm,
particular church, your particular house of worship. A lot of more modern churches also don't have pews. They have just set up chairs.
mhm.
And again, I've
Yeah.
seen it all. I mean, I've been in every denomination, every faith, every kind of house of worship, and they're all a little bit similar. So what I would suggest to people is take those things into account depending on the way that your church is laid out, determine where would you have the most advantage based on where the threat is likely to come in from, which is most likely the doors and back. Again, coming
Mhm,
back to, I have found that the places I have been, usually the other exits will be fire exits, so you can go out, but you can't come in.
yeah.
Right. That's for safety. So if you're in a place that you could get out of an exit, maybe being close to that is a good thing, but the threat's going to come in from those main doors behind you.
Mm,
Right. So you base your location based on that. Another thing that I really encourage people to think about, especially when you're talking about the possibility for violence in a place as crowded as a house of worship. And that is until the threat is within striking distance, don't draw your gun.
mm,
Get confident with drawing your gun quickly. Okay, you were mentioning how you had those security off-duty police officers running around with guns drawn. Keith made the point in that video, how easy would it be for responding patrol officers to come in there and just see some dude in civilian clothes with a
yeah.
gun in his hand, and they could be killed by friendly fire. You want to get confident enough with getting your gun out quickly that it stays holstered until the threat's right there. And I am
Mm,
a firm believer in that. I've even seen that play out many times, like in Force on Force, where whatever the scenario is, okay, they're shooting outside, and and it's done well. They're shooting the simunitions, so you hear gunfire and like somebody's standing there in the middle of a crowd with their gun already out. I'm like,
yeah.
God, what are you doing, man? It's like your chance of taking friendly fire from somebody is exceedingly high. Even if you clear the garment and have your hand on the gun, but it's still in the holster
Mm,
on your waistband, that improves your own safety from getting shot by a responding officer or again another concealed carry holder in the congregation, right?
mm,
You don't want to be standing there with a gun in your hand even if you've heard gunshots. And I think
mhm.
a big problem people have is they're not confident with their ability to get that gun out efficiently and quickly.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I really hadn't thought about that. And do you suggest that church security teams should have, say, ID on a lanyard
Mm.
that they can quickly pull out and display if something does go
Yeah,
down.
or something. Keith mentioned that again. I defer to him because I'm not an expert on church security, and forming teams or team tactics. That's totally
Mm-hmm.
outside of my wheelhouse. Totally in his. He mentioned that like they should have something that they can don that's an identifier,
Yeah.
right? And that's I think a great point he makes. Again, I
Mm.
come back to I give no advice with that. I'm not involved with that at all. On
Yeah.
security teams. I think strictly in the terms of you are a concealed carry holder, you are wearing
Mm-hmm.
your gun, you're a civilian at the site when it happens. And if
Yeah.
that's what you are in civilian clothing. There is
Yeah.
nothing identifying you. You're not wearing a shirt that says good guy,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
if you have that gun in your hand, there is a target on your back. Draw the gun when the threat is right there.
Yeah, interesting. I've had some experience in the casino security industry,
Mm,
and in my experience, at least the supervisory staff at a particular casino that I was involved with, all dressed the same. They were all wearing the same tie, the same color shirt,
it's a great
the
idea. Yeah.
same black blazer, and they actually did have identification tag. It wasn't big, it wasn't blatant, but they all looked the same. They all looked like it was like a uniform.
Hmm.
And then the base level guys all had their the shirts and that were identified as security. But even the supervisors, the guys that may or may not have had weapons on them, were basically uniformly dressed, and the local law enforcement knew who they were and how to quickly spot them and identify them. Just something to think about uh, for church security teams. But so yeah, where to sit, and a lot of this stuff is we went through a bunch of examples of things happening
Hmm.
outside of the buildings. So don't think you're going to be warm and fuzzy, just parking your car and walking in. Things can happen outside. So that situational awareness needs to be with you at all times. Well, obviously, we should use that. Our heads should be on a swivel while we're driving anyway, because cars are dangerous, even if people don't mean them to be. So we
Hmm.
should have that situational awareness. But when you're pulling into that church parking lot or that place of worship, you should be looking around and looking for uh, a possible threat. You really should. You should be a little paranoid. I think.
No
I think it's
question.
healthy to be a little paranoid. Be looking around. Look for that oddly dressed person. That person that's wearing that heavy clothing in the middle of summertime,
And I don't
or
call
or
it, I
carrying.
don't call it, just to correct you, I don't call it paranoid. I call it accepting reality for what it
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
right? I
And
mean,
I'm just yeah,
it's not theoretical what we're discussing. It's happening
yeah.
over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, if you see a weirdo, I'm just going to say it. If you see a weirdo, something may not be right.
Hmm.
So eyes on, and be aware of that. Even as you're parking and walking into those buildings, choose your seating correctly. If you have a family, have a family plan. We talk about that all the time. Have a family plan. If it goes down and it's fast and furious, you talk about this all the time. Can you take the shot? Do
Yes.
you have the training? Do you have the proper equipment? Do you have the ability? What would you how would you speak to that and expound on that, Sal?
Yeah, for sure. One of the important things to do is know your capabilities, like really know them, right?
Yeah,
So that will determine can you take the shot. And in a lot of instances that we've seen dealing with active killers, um, either law enforcement or carry permit holders who are carrying actually close distance to the point where they can make the shot. And these are the kind of things okay, can I make this shot at 30 yards? If I know I'm only comfortable making that shot at 15 yards, in all the chaos, people forget that an active killer attacks places with an immense crowd. He's not attacking a church with you and one other guy sitting in the pew, right? He's
yeah,
attacking a place with it because he wants to rack up a count while he is busy trying to execute helpless victims.
yeah,
There has been over and over and over again the opportunity to flank him and close the distance. So know your capability. In light of the past few years of just the increase, unfortunately, in this active killer thing, I tend to start my range sessions different than I used to, where it used to be always the focus on, blazing speed, 7 yards, etc. I've been lately putting just again in my own private practice, putting the stress on myself of making a real accuracy shot at a further distance. Can I do this right now on demand?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And here's another thing I like doing. It's not that far, but it's a smaller target. I use a B8 target and I'll run it out to only 10 yards. But again, a lot of these neutralizations happen at a pretty close range. But what I'm doing is I am going as fast as possible, but 10 for 10. One shot out of the holster. Can I go 10 for 10, still doing it quickly and stay in the black of that B8? Okay, at 10
Yeah.
yards. And then of course you can get, can I do it at 25 yards? Can I
Yeah.
stay in the black or at least in that 8 ring at 25 yards? Can I go 10 for
Yep.
10 doing that? So know your capability because that will determine how close do you have to get? And
Yeah.
realistically, we've seen it over and over again. When it happens, a lot of times there is the opportunity to flank and get close enough. So know your
Yeah.
capabilities. That would be my biggest piece of advice. Can you make the shot? Well, can you? Have you tried? How far out can you make the shot?
hmm Yeah.
Yep.
I like to play games with my guns. I like to shoot
Mhm.
USPSA and Steel Challenge and the Light EPA every once in a while. And it's timed event. You get a little bit of adrenaline, get a little bit of pressure going on there.
Mhm.
But typically, we don't have really far shots, and
Mhm.
so I love to shoot steel targets when I'm on my own because. Well, you get that instant gratification of that sound of
Right.
that round hitting that steel. And also, if you're going to shoot and train at some distance, which is what we're talking about right now, you get an instant indication whether you've hit the
Yeah.
target
Oh,
or
yeah.
not.
Steel is
In
great.
my
Certainly.
opinion, I'm just going to throw this out there. If you're a concealed carrier, uh, absolutely, you should be able to hit an 8 or 10 inch target at 25 yards. It's not really that far, 75 feet. Think about it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I like to if I can regularly hit a 50-yard 10 or 12-inch piece of steel, slow fire. Now, mind you, I shoot red dots on my guns. I can
The
really
difference.
zero in
No
with my
question.
red
Yeah.
dots, and red dots are really good for me. It's great for me. I really recommend them for everybody.
Mhm.
Taurus is even making red dot ready revolvers now. I don't know if you knew that, Sal,
Yeah.
with that are optics ready. They throw your optic on there.
Mhm.
So I run a Trijicon SRO on one of my guns. I run a Holosun on my Glock 19, which is on my regular carry gun.
Mhm.
I run a 509T, which is a really cool red dot sight that's totally enclosed, so the emitter is protected
Right.
against weather and dirt and things like that. And it's got a little solar panel on top that YouTube doesn't like us to show off our guns. I have to describe it to you, but because I've trained and practiced and slow fire. We can shoot that target out there at 50 yards, and
No question.
it's
The
not little bitty
dot.
bulls. It's a
Yeah.
it's a with a red dot. Now
Hmm.
I'm going to tell you guys out there, you guys that are watching this that are carriers, if you haven't tried shooting with red dots, man, you are missing out. It's a whole new ball game, especially if you're getting older. Your eyesight changes a little bit. It's fantastic. You're taking this whole process of lining up your front sight, your back sight, focusing on the front sight, making sure they're aligned, putting it on the target, and so on. This whole process into one process of dot on target, pull the trigger,
Yeah,
and
certainly. With a
you
smaller
really,
aiming point, it's a total
yes,
game changer for distance. There's no doubt about
absolutely,
that. What I do with my open sight guns is to be comfortable with a gun I'm carrying. I like to be able to shoot a 90 on a B8 at 25 yards with open sights. Okay,
yeah,
and this is
okay,
slow
yeah.
fire. Okay, but like a 90.
That's respectable. Yes.
Yeah, and with my eyesight with open sights, I can't do much better. And then I'd like to be able to keep it on I forget the name of it. It's like the tiny little version of the B27 target, the B14 or whatever. It's only like 10 inches wide or 12
Yep.
inches wide, something like that. I'd like to be able to keep them all on that at 50.
Sure.
Okay.
Because really, you're looking at a
Yeah,
human torso
yeah,
essentially
correct.
at
At
that
50
point. Yeah.
yards, now we're
hmm
getting, I'm sure there's some guys can do it. I can't make headshots at 50 yards. The 25 yards, okay, yeah, that's more in the ballpark, but that's
hmm
with iron sights. And I'm
hmm
comfortable with that. The thing is with a
hmm
dot gun, even though I have significant astigmatism and I see like a starburst blob, even so, the dot is so much more accurate. I can
hmm
routinely shoot a B8 at 25 yards in the high 90s.
Yeah.
like routinely, and I don't necessarily do that much shooting. And then, you take like a 12-inch plate at 50 yards with the dot, it's like cheating. It's like
Yeah.
using a rifle,
Yeah.
it's just
No, it's
amazing.
fantastic. Yeah.
So this is, all of this to speak to the technology is there. So, if you really consider this, hey, I'm at church every Sunday. The church is crowded. I might have to make a 50-yard shot between the pew I'm in and that door, look into dots and get
Or
training there
outside.
because it's
Or outside.
yeah, or
Yep.
outside. Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Think of that incident you mentioned with the woman who opens fire. I think they said she was like 40 yards away or something. You
Yeah.
want to make that shot with open sights or a dot, right? The dot is a complete game changer. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about it.
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about. Be equipped, train, be ready, have a plan. Know things that can happen anytime, any place. Just because first responders are there doesn't mean they're going to be able to save you. You still have to be your first
Mm.
responder. A lot of things to think about. Crazy stuff going on. There's probably by the time this video airs, there are going to be updates to the incidents that I've spoken about. And viewers, if you know of other incidents that we haven't mentioned that have happened just recently, let us know about them, especially if you've been involved or you're familiar with the area, or you've grown up there. Or, I'm also interested in knowing if our viewers have been in interesting different situations like you have, Sal, in some different areas of worship, and sort of the nomenclature of the building is different,
Mm.
or the seating is different, the layout is different, it's more of a threat, it's less of a threat. I'd really like to know what our viewers think about that as well. And guys that are watching, guys and gals, tell us how you train. Are you ready if something happens at your place of worship? How are you going to respond? Are you by yourself? Do you keep your family with you? Do you have a family plan? Where do you sit? What are you thinking about? And do you have a routine, that you go through? Are you on a church security team? I'd really like to know that. And tell us about that team. Do you train? How do you train? What kind of equipment do you use? Do you have surveillance? Do you wear earpieces on radios? Do you have the ability to communicate with each other? This is a whole huge area of discussion. I really like to know people's experience with this. And as we mentioned earlier, follow Keith and Christian Warrior Training. Fantastic information. He
Oh,
actually offers,
fantastic.
yeah,
Yeah,
he offers
amazing.
a lot of free training
Uh,
there, and it's really good stuff. And our time is about up, Sal, and you know what that means.
all right, we got to
We're
get
going to
back to
jump
it.
into our conflicted question. Would you mind reading it one more time for
Sure.
us?
Now, since we've actually been talking about something this whole time, I didn't have a chance to actually think about this one. So I
Good.
guess we're going to be
Kept your mind
answering it
busy, didn't
fresh.
we?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'll read it again. Here we go. Your last loved one in the world has contracted a deadly disease that can spread to you. To take care of her before she passes would certainly mean your death. But if you don't take care of her needs, no one else will. What would you do in this situation if this happened to you? And I think I answered first last time, Denny. So you're up.
Yeah, I'm gonna take care of my significant other, and whatever happens, happens. There's just no way I couldn't do that. I just get emotional even thinking about
Mm,
this. I could not, in no way, no how, not take care of the woman that I love, whomever that person is. And no, I'm going to do what I should do as a man and as a protector and as a husband or a significant other, whatever it is. I'm going to take care of that person, and whatever happens to me is going to happen to me, and I'll take judgment for that when I'm gone. That's my answer.
yeah, I'm right there with you. This one for me is, I think, a little bit easier answer than a lot of them have been. And it doesn't necessarily say it's even your significant other, but it does say it's your last loved one. So,
Yeah.
I think it
And yeah,
depends
you
on,
know that's a good
yeah,
point. In my mind, I'm thinking this is
yeah, yeah.
this is my woman we're talking about here.
But even so,
It might be your mother, your father, your child, your friend, your loved
I
friend,
don't know, your
your
cousin
something.
who you've made it through. This is the last one you've made it through your
Yeah,
apocalypse
yeah,
with it, whatever.
yeah.
So,
My answer is going to be the same
yeah,
regardless.
me too. Me too. So, I think it depends a lot on your outlook on things. For me, death is by far not the worst possibility, right? It's
Yeah,
inevitable for all of us. And I'm pretty confident in the historical message that this is not all there is. So for me, if it means my own death, going out with my last loved one on Earth. I think I'll take that over abandoning them and then roaming the world for whatever time I have left. Post-apocalyptic. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
that's where I stand.
I'll be interested in seeing what our viewers say about that.
Yeah, for
Guys and
sure.
gals that are watching us, let us know what you would do in that scenario as well. Please answer those questions that I posed earlier. We're really interested in knowing about you and your experiences, and especially if you're involved in these scenarios that we're talking about, church security, etc. We really want to know what you think. We do read the comments, and we really try to get in there and interact as much as we can. Sometimes we are blown up with comments and attention
Hmm.
and views and so forth. And speaking of views, thank you for watching. Make sure you hit all those buttons. It's extremely important to help our algorithm, because big tech wants to suppress a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. So make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share. Make sure you follow Keith Graves. Make sure you pick up that book by Sal De Janeiro, 21st Century Minuteman. Give me a little plug there, Sal, for your book. We are going to post some links to some useful information. Sal has sent me some information to post as well, and we really hope you check it out. So thanks again for watching. Sal, thank you again for joining us. Been a fantastic discussion. Everybody take care out there until we'll see you again real soon.